Okay, so in the last video we covered the ideal process for improvising. But if even one of these elements is underdeveloped, we're going to struggle. Let's look at how problems manifest in each phase. Shortcomings in each of these areas cause very specific problems. The result of being weak in reception is not audiating. Struggling with identification is not knowing. Difficulty with conversion means not visualizing. And finally, being unable to execute demonstrates a lack of technical ability on the instrument. And yes, I couldn't come up with a fourth knot, and that's why I make the big bucks. So we're going to take a look at each issue and some fixes. Before we do, though, I just want to share a hard truth. This stuff is difficult. Achieving true proficiency in improvisation is an arduous process. And I don't say that to discourage anyone. In fact, I mean the opposite. Don't get down if some of this stuff is brutally hard for you. It would be surprising if it were easy. This also isn't binary in that you can either do it or you can't. It gets harder as the material gets harder. So start small and build it up. Alright, let's dive in. Alright, problem 1 is not audiating. This is one of the most common problems, colloquially referred to as playing with the fingers instead of the ear, in which the student doesn't hear anything beforehand, only what comes out of their instrument. Sadly, our music education system reinforces this behavior because of its obsession with chord scale theory. Chord scale theory isn't inherently bad, though I do have my issues with its implementation, which is a discussion for another video. On the surface, it makes sense. It's the quickest way to get students to play the right notes and make the changes. But it's also the quickest way to get students to play a bunch of notes without really saying anything. Students struggle to make phrases that sound coherent and relevant. This leads to what I call musical syntax errors. It's like trying to write a brilliant novel but refusing to read any other books, not knowing how commas work, and only picking words at random from the dictionary. You'll get a lot of sentences that aren't wrong, but at the same time don't really make much sense. Theory should be used to explain and identify the sounds we hear and pick up from our favorite players. Attempts to create music from theory alone often fail. Tools are no good if you don't know how to use them. Alright, so let's look at some solutions. The first is transcription. When I use this word, I mean learning things by ear from recordings and playing them on our instruments. Though the word literally means to write the notes down, I don't think that's imperative. Transcription helps with each part of rice, and it's going to be in each solution section. Transcription encourages audiation because it helps us immerse ourselves in the language. In the novel analogy, this is the equivalent of reading other books. If a student struggles with audiation in their chosen genre or idiom, one of the best things they can do is to put on a recording of a player they like and sing along to a melody or a solo. Other things we can try include audiating existing melodies, such as nursery rhymes or a favorite song, audiating existing melodies and varying certain elements, such as rhythm or note choice, audiating intervals and arpeggios, and trying to compose a melody just by audiating. Alright, next is poor identification skills. Those who struggle in this area have no trouble audiating, but have difficulty identifying exactly what it is they're hearing. For example, a student can hear happy birthday in their head, but doesn't know what the intervals are. This also leads to playing with the fingers because even though they do audiate, it doesn't matter since they can't do anything with the information. They either abandon the ideas in their mind and default to what their hands know, or they try to hunt and peck for the notes in their head and end up playing inaccurately. It is important to note that theoretical knowledge is borderline essential here, and it helps students put a name to a face for each sound that they hear. This is what I would call a solution prerequisite. We need to have some way to make sense of what we're hearing, the input language that I referred to in the last video. Learning a system such as movable do and Nashville numbers takes the focus off absolutism and shifts it to relativism. That is, the exact pitch or key center isn't important. What is important are chord progressions, scale degrees, chord tones, etc. 1, 2, 3 or do, re, mi matters so much more than whether the notes are specifically C, D, E, or F, G, A. So now that we've addressed our prerequisite, let's assume we're fluent in one such system, but we still struggle with identification. What are some solutions we can explore? Alright, as I mentioned, transcription is the number one. If a student struggles with identification, they should focus on transcribing without using their instrument to help them figure out the right notes. Instead, they should figure out just the starting pitch and then use their ears to learn the rest. This process is painstaking at first, but ultimately necessary and worth it. Traditional melodic or harmonic dictation serves the same purpose. Next, we can work on audiating existing melodies such as nursery rhymes or a favorite song, and then identifying the content. For example, we can audiate hot cross buns and then identify the melody as 3-2-1 or mi re do. If this is way beyond your ability right now and you don't know which way is up, where home is, what 1 or 3 sounds like, etc., that's okay. You're at the beginning of the journey, but we're going to talk about where to start. Finally, using the hunt and peck method when improvising during practice sessions is cool, because when we practice, there's no harm in playing the wrong notes. I like this exercise because even though it might sound bad most of the time, it ultimately gets students in the habit of following their ear instead of compensating with their fingers. Before we move on, I think it's important to recommend my video on internalization. It's called The Most Important Lesson I Ever Learned, and it really shaped the way I think about oral skills or ear training for musicians. If you're struggling with identification or if it takes you a long time, I think that video will really help. Problem 3 is poor conversion skills. In this scenario, we have no trouble audiating or identifying, but struggle to convert input language to output language. A student hears an interval and is able to identify it as a minor third, but doesn't know how to execute that interval on their instrument. Like the previous examples, the student can audiate, but cannot use that information. Again, they ultimately start playing with their fingers and abandon the ideas in their mind, or they try and hunt and peck for the notes and end up playing inaccurately. Here, the student has to gain familiarity with their instrument. They have to become fluent in the output language. Right now, they identify things in music terms, but not instrument terms. So, our solution prerequisite here is knowing all the notes on the instrument. It is a non-negotiable for proficiency. Students must know where all notes lie on their instrument. They should seek to learn this information in a systematic way relative to their instrument. For example, guitarists should map out intervals on the instrument, noting that certain string sets contain the same shape. Again, repetitious drilling is necessary, but we must strive to truly internalize the content so that there's no guesswork. Okay, so we know all the notes on our instrument, but conversion is difficult. What can we do? Alright, so transcription's number 1 again here. Students who struggle with conversion must focus on visualizing a phrase on their instrument. They may be able to listen to a phrase and decode its content with ease, but if they struggle to map it out on their instrument, they'll have to practice it. I encourage students to drill the fundamental content, like note names, intervals, chords, etc., on their instrument separately, and when it comes to transcription, to try and visualize the content on their instrument without touching it. This is not an unbreakable rule, and I don't want students to feel like this is the only way to transcribe and that they can never play something on their instrument unless they plan it out first. But it's great practice and an excellent habit to form. Next, we can audiate existing melodies such as nursery rhymes or a favorite song, then identify the content and then visualize it on the instrument in any key. For example, we can audiate hot cross buns, identify the melody as 3-2-1 or mi re do, and then we can think, how would I play that in C on my instrument, or A flat? Practice with different keys, different ranges, etc. This process is the same as the transcription exercise, but with simpler source material. Finally, again, using the hunt and peck method when improvising during our practice sessions is cool. This gets us in the habit of following the ear, and as above, we're just trying to strengthen that connection between what we hear and how to execute it, trying to make it as natural as possible. Alright, the last problem is poor technical skill. As I mentioned, this is the physical part of data output. If someone struggles here, they know what to play but don't have the command over their instrument to execute. This is purely technical proficiency on your instrument. Fingers, breathing, embouchure, etc. We've saved the easiest one for last. The good thing about technical practice is that it has nothing to do with the ear. I find technical practice enjoyable because we can combine it with theoretical practice. That is, we can use arpeggios, different scales, etc. The primary focus is getting the fingers moving, up for anything and everything that we could imagine to play. Still, as a secondary focus, we can work our brains by supplying more adventurous content to the fingers. So, what are some solutions that we can explore here? Number 1, transcription. The reason it's so important for the physical realm is that it gets us in the habit of executing the type of material that we want to play. If we want to play bebop saxophone solos on guitar, we need to practice mapping and executing them. We have to make decisions regarding when to change strings, pick direction, etc. It also challenges us in terms of tempo. Playing things that lay weirdly on your instrument at faster speeds is a challenge unto itself. Next, scales and arpeggios, which is pretty self-explanatory. Make sure to include chromatic scales in this too. Practice with a metronome or a backing track and bump up the tempo. With this one, don't expect to make huge leaps of improvement from one practice session to the next. This one's going to take time and will be ongoing. There are a million creative ways to practice this stuff, so pick your favorite and get to it. Finally, there's instrument-specific requirements. This is very broad, but you have to work on things specific to your instrument. So guitarists have to work on picking, while saxophonists do long tones. And hand-and exercises are great for pianists as they're a workout for both hands. I also include exercises that don't necessarily sound great, but offer some technical value. In guitar world, this is stuff like spider exercises, but I don't know what the equivalent is for other instruments. Alright, so now that we've covered some problem areas and potential solutions, how can we figure out which parts we excel at and which ones we struggle with? I'm going to talk from a teacher's perspective, but you can use this process by yourself and it should give you some answers. If it doesn't, seek out a teacher and they'll point you in the right direction. So first, the way our students describe their struggles with improvisation can tell us a lot about which areas need addressing. We can learn a lot just by asking questions like, what about improvisation is difficult for you? A lot of times their answer will point to the solution with a glowing neon sign. They might say, I hear music in my head but don't know how to play it, or I know what I want to play but my fingers feel slow. And while knowing the solution doesn't mean the path is easy or instant, it does mean it's straightforward. Second, we can literally walk through this process with students and see for ourselves where they struggle. We could try the following. We could ask them to hear hot cross buns in their head. We can even tell them the key or play it for them. And then after that, we can ask them to sing it or hum it. After that, we can ask them to sing or hum and identify the intervals. They can use solfege or numbers. Then we can ask them to sing or hum while visualizing how they might play it on their instrument. And finally, we can ask them to play it on their instrument. Ideally, the step with which the student struggles should tell us where we need to direct our energy in practice. If they struggle with steps 1 and 2, we'll need audiation work. If 3, we might need some traditional theory or oral skills practice. If 4 and 5, we might need more focus on the instrument itself. Obviously, I'm seriously oversimplifying here. Every student will be different, and some will even struggle with multiple parts of the equation. Yet, hopefully, I'm getting my point across that improvisation doesn't need to be such a mystery. We can break it down into its constituent parts and tackle it bit by bit. Alright, I think that just about covers the conceptual aspect of improv. One final disclaimer. Though this is the basic process that we want to strive for when we improvise, there's still a lot of practical work that we need to do. We need to hash this stuff out and work on being creative. Again, if you want to be a great writer, it's not like you're going to read a couple of books and then write a brilliant novel on your first try. There's so much trial and error involved and so much filtering that needs to happen. That's what we're going to address in the next video on the practical side of things.